This is the Shahid Shah Show. Straight talk on building, buying, and investing in digital health. No hype, no buzzwords, no speculation. Just what actually works, maybe what doesn't, and most importantly, why. If you're building healthcare technology or buying it, this is where reality shows up. Prior authorization for prescription drugs has existed since the 1970s. Let that sit in for a moment. Before the internet, before EHRs, before fax machines were standard equipment in physician offices, before most of the people in building healthcare technology today might have even been born, we had prior authorization for drugs. We had a formal process requiring clinicians to ask payers for permission before prescribing, and payers would consult criteria binders and make decisions, and the answer would come back by phone or letter, and care would wait. That was 50 years ago. In the decades since, we have had the advent of managed care, the passage of HIPAA, the Affordable Care Act, two major waves of EHR adoption, the emergence of FHIR as a national health data exchange standard, and approximately 17 iterations of interoperability rulemaking by CMS. We've had press releases, pilot programs, stakeholder convenings, and working groups. We've had promises from technology vendors that automation would solve the problem. We've had promises from payers that they were streamlining their processes. We've had both of those promises made at every HIMSS conference I can remember attending, which is most of them. The fax machine is still in use. By most rigorous estimates, the prior authorization system in the United States now costs the healthcare industry somewhere between $30 and $50 billion annually in administrative overhead. Not the cost of the drugs, mind you. Not the clinical cost of delays, just the overhead of the permission asking process itself. Now, let's assume we're all wrong and it's half that amount, or that we're all wrong and it's double that amount. What does it matter? It's bad either way. But on April 10th, 2026, just a few weeks ago, CMS issued a proposed rule, CMS 0062P, requiring payers participating in the Medicare Advantage, Medicaid, CHIP managed care, and federal health exchanges to process drug prior authorization requests digitally, 50 years later. FHIR standards for medical benefit drugs, NCPDP standards for pharmacy benefit drugs, specific decision deadlines, mandatory denial explanations, reporting requirements, API transparency. On October 1st, 2027, if finalized, all of this is supposed to come true. And comments are due on June 15, 2026, right around the corner. The press release called it a significant expansion of interoperability requirements. That's not wrong. It's just that the interesting question isn't whether this is significant. The interesting question is who benefits, how, and most importantly, who is about to build the wrong thing chasing the right problem. Because there is a conventional read on this rule that is going to produce 50 companies and one mediocre market, and there's an unconventional read that points to a much smaller number of genuinely defensible businesses, a set of strategic moves buyers should be making right now, and a business model angle that nobody's discussing at all. That's what today's episode is about. I'm going to spend a little time without any hype, without digital transformation promises, no speculation about what AI might do, just maybe a close reading of what this regulation actually requires, what it creates, and where the money actually is. Let me start with the people building solutions, because there are going to be a lot of them, and most of them are going to build the wrong thing for the right reasons, though. Now, here's what's going to happen in the next 18 months. I predict someone is going to read this rule, see FHIR-based prior authorization for drugs, and build a prior authorization automation platform. It's going to have a really nice interface. It'll pull data from the EHR. It'll submit prior auth requests. It'll track status. It'll use AI to pre-populate clinical documentation based on diagnosis and medication history. There's going to be a demo at HIMSS. Of course, there were tons of them in the last couple of years. There's going to be a press release about health system partnerships. There's going to be 50 of them. They're going to all roughly work. They'll compete on price, and by 2028, prior auth for drugs will be a feature inside Epic, Oracle Health, major EHR vendors. It's not going to be a standalone category for very, very long. If you're building that company today, you're building a feature, not a business. So the question is, what should you actually build? The first non-obvious opportunity is what I'd call denial intelligence infrastructure. What is prior auth all about? It is a opportunity. It's a permission request, but it's an opportunity for a denial to occur so that costs do not get incurred, potentially safety is not impacted, etc. The rule requires payers to provide a clear, individualized explanation whenever a drug prior auth request is denied, sufficiently detailed that the provider can understand the basis for the denial and hopefully explain it to the patient, and specifically what would be needed to remedy it. CMS is trying to be explicit. Vague or proprietary language is the current problem, and the proposed rule is designed to fix it. Sounds like a patient advocacy provision. It's actually a data generation mandate. Every structured denial explanation is a labeled clinical data set. This request was denied, quote, because the submitted documentation did not establish that the patient had failed first-line therapy X. This request was denied because the prescribed dosage exceeded coverage criteria for indication Y. This request was denied because concurrent use of drug Z requires additional safety documentation. At scale, across payers and therapeutic categories, that denial text, now both machine readable and standardized, teaches you exactly what each payer's actual clinical criteria are supposed to be. Not what's published in their coverage policies, what their systems actually enforce. Those two things are meaningfully different. Coverage policies is not the same as what their IT systems actually enforce. That gap between stated and revealed clinical criteria is among the most commercially valuable knowledge in healthcare. And this rule is about to generate it in structured form for the first time. The builder, those of you who are creating software systems technology, who ingests these clinical denial explanations across payers and therapeutic categories, normalizes that language, models the patterns, and uses that knowledge to help providers build pre-auth clinical documentation that's optimized for likely approval before submission. That's probably a more defensible business than what the EHR vendors are just going to slap into their software in the coming years. Because you're not automating paperwork, you're encoding institutional knowledge about payer behavior that takes experienced prior auth specialists years to accumulate. You're making that knowledge transferable, scalable, and continuously updated as payer criteria drift. That's a real moat. The second unobvious opportunity is the standards bifurcation. The rule handles drugs under the medical benefit through FHIR APIs, the same framework as the 2024 non-drug rule. Drugs dispensed through the pharmacy benefit use a completely different set of standards maintained by NCPDP. Those two frameworks are designed to be non-overlapping. They serve different workflows. They're supposed to have different implementers. They connect to different stakeholder systems. Most of you builders are going to pick one and ignore the other. A FHIR native tool aimed at medical benefit specialty drugs, such as IV infusions, Part B injectables, oncology drugs administered in the clinic, or you might pick the NCPDP compliant tool aimed at oral specialty drugs, which are dispensed at specialty pharmacies. That's understandable, of course. Building one is already hard. Building both, of course, is genuinely difficult. But it's that difficulty that creates the moat. It's what's going to let your business last a long time or make it more valuable. Payers, providers, and the vendors in between don't have unified workflows across medical and pharmacy benefits today. A patient on a specialty biologic might have their infused dose managed under the Medicare benefit and their oral companion drug managed under the pharmacy benefit, with two entirely separate PA processes, two separate payer relationships, and no coordination between them. It's not a regulation problem, it's a structural problem that predates this rule, and it's going to persist long after the compliance is achieved. A platform that bridges both standards and delivers a coherent cross-benefit workflow has a genuine, differentiated position. The third thing builders need to understand is the most strategically important and perhaps the least discussed in all of our discussions. The rule mandates payer compliance, but for pharmacy benefit drugs, payers typically don't run their own PA processes. They contract that to PBMs, pharmacy benefit managers like CVS Caremark, Express Scripts, OptumRx, and a bunch of other smaller PBMs. The rule places the obligation on the health plan. The operational system, the obligation often applies to, is in the PBM system. That's a compliance gap. Another business opportunity. A health plan is on the hook for the API endpoints, denial explanation requirements, and performance reporting that are operationally in the hands of an entity that may not be directly subject to the rules mandates. Every health plan contracting with a PBM is going to need to renegotiate terms. Every PBM is going to need to build or acquire compliant infrastructure. And right now, no one is selling a product, potentially, at least that I've not heard of, clearly targeted at that buyer. The PBM compliance infrastructure market is sitting in front of the builders who are too focused on physician-facing workflow to notice it. But if you do notice it, you're going to get to somewhere faster than a lot of your competitors. If you're just tuning in, this is the Shahid Shah Show, where we cut through the noise in digital health and talk honestly about how healthcare technology actually gets built, bought, deployed, and paid for. Today, we're breaking down CMS's new drug prior authorization interoperability rule, quite a mouthful, and why the obvious opportunities might not be the ones for buyers, builders, or investors. Now, we've talked a lot about the builder side, so let's shift to the buyer side. What are the things that hospitals and health system buyers are at a real risk of misreading when this rule actually gets implemented? So here's the dominant narrative. This rule reduces administrative burden. Faster prior auth decisions, electronic workflows, better denial explanations, less time on the phone with payer call centers, fewer patient delays at the pharmacy counter, fewer staff hours consumed by a fax follow-up. That's the story. And it's true, as far as it goes. If that's all health systems are extracting from this regulatory moment, they're probably leaving some strategic asset on the table. Now, here's what prior authorization data flowing through standardized APIs actually represents. It's real-time intelligence on payer behavior. Let's think about that again. What did I just say? Real-time intelligence on payer behavior, something that we've not had with just claims alone, because claims is a historical artifact, something that has already happened. But payer behavior through permissioned systems, for example, prior auth, is intelligence on their upcoming behavior. Every time a PA request goes out and a decision comes back, you learn something. What did the payer approve? What did they deny? On what grounds? For which drugs? At which dosages? Under which clinical criteria? Against which first-line alternatives? Right now, most of that information lives in phone calls, fax confirmations, PDF letters, and most likely the institutional memory of your pharmacy staff. It's knowledge that doesn't get captured systemically. It doesn't get analyzed. It doesn't feed back into clinical decision making. And the rule changes the data infrastructure. This new rule doesn't do so automatically. It creates structured data flows, but it doesn't create the analytics layer to use them. That analytics infrastructure is something smart health systems need to explicitly build or buy. A large academic medical center running hundreds of specialty drug PA requests per month, maybe across a dozen payers and multiple therapeutic categories, is about to have a machine-readable record of every payer's revealed clinical criteria. That's formulary intelligence. There is no standard database where you can get all of these formularies across all the payers, but if you could have it, it tells you which drugs in a given therapeutic category have favorable prior auth or PA profiles across your payer mix. Which drugs are being denied systematically, regardless of how the documentation is written? Which payers are making coverage decisions that diverge from their own published criteria? Which doesn't sound like it happens often, but it happens more often than payers would like to imagine. Payers assume that they build out their rules, the rules get documented, the people get trained, but ultimately, it's not the written rules that are important. It is what are the IT systems designed to implement and what decisions that they make. That intelligence should feed back into your clinical pathways, into your therapeutic substitution protocol, in contract negotiations with payers, into decisions about which biosimilars to push, which specialty drugs to stock, and where the real friction in your formulary actually lives. Health systems that treat this as an IT compliance project will get a better, somewhat better PA workflow. The ones that treat it like an intelligence infrastructure, uh, that investment will get something worth considerably more. Now, the concrete things buyers should be demanding from vendors and currently aren't getting, the first is cross-payer analytics. Any automation tool can tell you the status of individual requests. Very few can tell you across your entire PA volume which payers deny at the highest rate for which drag classes. What are the stated reasons? Are those reasons consistent over time? Ask every vendor you evaluate whether the platform aggregates denial reason across your payer mix and surfaces it in structured reporting so that you can do something about it, so you can train your personnel, etc. If the answer is no, you're not buying a workflow tool. That's fine if workflow is your problem. It's not fine if you're paying for intelligence and you're not getting it. Second thing to look at is outcome tracking past the PA decision itself. Not just was the prior authorization approved, but did the patient receive the drug? Was there a delay? Was there a clinical consequence of that delay? Was there an appeal? And did it succeed? And what documentation made the difference? Most PA systems track up to the approval or denial and stop. Your EHRs are probably going to do that, if not this year, next year, or the year after. The clinical and operational data that lives downstream, though, in the pharmacy system, in the infusion suite, in the medical record, is what tells you whether or not the PA process is actually working at a patient level. Vendors who can't connect those data points are giving you only half the picture. Third, and this is specific to buyers contracting cycles with PBMs, you need explicit FHIR and NCPDP compliance language in your PBM agreements, tied to the same October 2027 timeline as the rule. Your health plan partners are on the hook for compliance. But if your PBM isn't contractually obligated to meet the same standards on the same schedule, you're going to find yourself technically compliant at the health plan and operationally not compliant at the PBM level. The contract language should be in your next PBM renewal, not the 28, your next one. There's a harder buyer question that deserves attention than it's getting. Prior auth, for all its dysfunction, does serve a clinical governance function. When done properly, which maybe a lot of us will say it rarely is, but when it is, it enforces evidence-based prescribing criteria, surfaces potential interactions, and creates a documentation trail with real clinical value. The risk is, in automation, when you speed up a process without improving its clinical content, the issue is that fast, bad PA is not better than slow, bad PA. When evaluating prior auth automation platforms, buyers should ask specifically, who owns the clinical criteria logic? Who maintains it? Who updates it when the evidence changes? If the answer is, we use the payer's criteria as received, then you've encoded the payer's preferences into your clinical workflow system. That might be acceptable. It should be a deliberate choice, though, not a implementation default. It's very dangerous to just accept what the payers are doing and code that into your systems because payers can often make mistakes. So what do we know now? Builders, the commodity opportunity in generic PA automation is real but finite. Be careful. The market's going to consolidate quickly. The survivors are going to be EHR embedded features or acquisitions by health IT incumbents. It's not going to be a bunch of independent businesses. The defensible positions are in denial intelligence, cross-standard FHIR and NCPDP integration, which hopefully bridges medical and pharmacy benefits, and PBM compliance infrastructure. If you're building specialty-focused tool for oncology, rare disease, biosimilars, where a single drug can cost several $100,000 per year, and the clinical documentation requirements are genuinely complex, there you can have a market that can sustain a real company and commands premium pricing. However, if you're trying to build a generic PA automation platform aimed at primary care drug classes, you're building a feature that's going to be acquired or commoditized within just a couple of years. And investors in such companies should be very, very wary of that. Now, on the buyer side, the intelligent infrastructure play is more valuable than the workflow automation play. Make that the frame for your vendor evaluations. It doesn't mean that the general workflow is unimportant. Of course, EHRs and others are going to handle it, but they won't often give you the intelligent infrastructure you need. Update your PBM contracts now. Figure out what needs to change, not when you're scrambling for compliance in late 2027. Demand cross-payer outcome analytics from vendors who say they are doing this work for you. Decide explicitly who owns your clinical criteria logic before you sign anything. Now, a quick note for investors. A lot of you are trying to get into this market because it is a big opportunity. Be cautious about funding horizontally ambitious PA automation platforms that you're not willing to just sell within a couple of years. I mean, if you're going to build something, sell it quickly, that's great. But the infrastructure layer, the fire and NCPDP compliance plumbing that payers and PBMs must build, that's where acquisition value concentrates. Those are the companies that get bought out by the EHR vendors, the PBMs, and specialty pharmacy companies for their technical and regulatory infrastructure. The denial intelligence companies, as I've talked about, though, are probably worth watching closely. See if their founders and the builders of these technologies that you're investing in understand the application layer for general workflow automation is going to get commoditized or absorbed unless it's anchored in deep therapeutic area, very specialty specific clinical content that can't easily be replicated. And everyone should mark the June 15, 2026 date on the calendar. That's the comment deadline. That's how CMS responds to payer and PBM objections about the NCPDP pharmacy benefit requirements. It's going to determine how much of this rule survives in its current form. The proposed rule is not finished becoming what it will be. One more note for builders on timing, though. The October 2027 sounds like it's a long runway. It isn't. It's going to, the payer organization is going to spend the first 12 months evaluating vendors and building internal business cases. They're going to spend the next 6 months in procurement cycles. That leaves a final 12 to 18 months for actual implementation, testing, maybe production deployment. It's not a comfortable window for systems touching live authorization decisions. The companies that need to be in deals today are the ones with implementation cycles longer than 6 months. If you're still in product development when that final rule lands, you may already be too late for the first wave of customers. So let me come into a closing model with the business model angle, because it's the one almost no one is talking about correctly. The obvious business model for PA automation is SaaS, sold to payers for compliance, or SaaS, told to providers for workflow efficiency. Both are real. Neither is the most important one to me. Specialty pharmaceutical manufacturers spend somewhere between $4 and $6 billion annually on what they call patient services programs, the infrastructure that helps patients navigate coverage verification, prior authorization, and appeals for high-cost specialty drug. A drug that costs $300,000 per year per patient doesn't just need a PA. It needs a full documented clinical case for every patient, managed by someone who knows the payer's criteria well enough to build an approval-ready submission for the first time, and who can respond to an appeal within 24 hours when the initial decision goes the wrong way. That infrastructure exists today mostly in human staff hub services. It's expensive, doesn't scale gracefully, and the prior auth component of it is pretty manual, as you'd probably imagine. The Fire API mandate, though, for drug PA, for the first time, a standard machine-readable interface between payers and entities submitting PA requests will, in some way, shape, or form, exist by next year and the year after. Specialty pharma manufacturers who currently fund patient services hubs to do PA work on their behalf of their patients, though, now they have a pathway to build or buy PA automation infrastructure that integrates directly with payer APIs, compliant with the rule as a natural extension of their existing patient services investment. That's a completely different buyer than a health system or physician group. Think about it. A pharma company funding PA automation for a single specialty drug generating $2 billion in US annual revenue has an extremely high willingness to pay for anything that reduces approval cycle time, denial rates, and appeals volume. Unlike a hospital, which needs maybe to handle dozens of drug classes across dozens of payers, the pharma-funded tool can be tightly optimized for a single drug with a single set of indications and the specific clinical trial criteria for each payer as it applies. That specificity is worth potentially a great deal. The business model question this creates is whether pharma-funded PA infrastructure creates alignment conflicts. A PA automation tool funded by a pharmaceutical manufacturer and optimized to facilitate approvals for that manufacturer's drugs is, stated plainly, a sophisticated patient access program dressed as clinical infrastructure. That's not problematic by itself, but if the drug has real clinical value and the criteria are being applied correctly, efficient authorization really does serve patients. But it needs to be transparent in vendor contracts and disclosed in health system evaluations. Buyers evaluating PA automation tools should ask directly, who funded the development of this platform? Is there a therapeutic area specifically baked into the clinical decision logic? Is there a pharmacy company, a pharma company upstream of this transaction? The reimbursement pathway for pharma-funded PA infrastructure doesn't flow through CMS fee schedules. It's going to flow through pharma patient services budgets, which are funded from drug margins, which are ultimately paid by payers and employers. The money moves in a circle, and understanding where you are in that circle probably matters a lot before you sign a contract. The final business model hanging in plain sight is the rules reporting requirements. Payers have got to publish prior auth performance metrics publicly. Approval rates, denial rates, turnaround times, appeals outcomes, etc. That's data is supposed to be free and available. And for the first time, you'll be able to compare payer PA behavior across these metrics. That public data set is a business in itself. It's not a subscription product, but analytical infrastructure, as I've talked about before. Companies that have historically built on top of mandatory public regulatory data, CMS, HEDIS, Medicare, have systemically undervalued themselves and then systematically acquired through different means. So these are all real questions. There's real experience, real decisions, and the business models that make all of it actually possible. Prior auth has been a known problem for 5 decades. The regulation that just landed is more interesting than the press releases suggest. And most of the people who will profit from it are going to go there just by asking questions that everyone else is too busy to ask. Most importantly, the comment period closes June 15th. If you have opinions, this is when they count. This is the Shahid Shah Show. And until next time, keep innovating, but stay real and practical.